A single gunshot echoed through the narrow streets of Wildwood Creek, Wyoming, in the summer of 1878, causing Dahlia Fletcher to clutch her infant daughter closer to her chest as she trudged wearily toward the small frontier town. The journey had been brutal: 3 weeks of travel by train and then stagecoach, followed by a 2-day walk after her money had run dry, all while caring for 4-month-old Emma and carrying what remained of her possessions in a single worn carpetbag. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Dahlia's pale skin as she passed the weathered sign welcoming visitors to Wildwood Creek. Her once fine blue dress was dusty and torn at the hem, and her dark brown hair, which had come loose from its pins, clung to her sweat-dampened neck. Emma whimpered softly against her shoulder, hungry and uncomfortable in the heat. "Just a little further, my sweet," Dahlia whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her daughter's forehead. "We'll find somewhere safe." The town was small but bustling, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, including a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and what appeared to be a doctor's office. Dahlia headed directly for the hotel, hoping to secure a room for at least one night while she figured out her next steps. The Wildwood Creek Hotel was a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and peeling paint. Inside, a stern-faced woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun stood behind the front desk. "Excuse me," Dahlia said, her voice hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "I need a room, please." The woman, Mrs. Hargrove, according to the small nameplate on the desk, looked Dahlia up and down with obvious disapproval. "We're full up," she said curtly. Dahlia glanced around the empty lobby. "Please, I have a baby. We've been traveling for weeks. I can pay for one night." She set down her carpetbag and reached into her pocket for her last few coins. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "Where's your husband?" Dahlia hesitated. He's not with us anymore." "I see." The woman's tone made it clear that she did see, and she didn't like what she saw. "As I said, we're full. This is a respectable establishment. We don't cater to women of questionable circumstances." Dahlia felt her face flush with humiliation. "Please, we have nowhere else to go. That's not my concern." Mrs. Hargrove turned away dismissively. "Try the next town over." "It's only 15 miles. 15 miles. Dahlia wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. She could barely stand, let alone walk 15 more miles with Emma and her bag. With as much dignity as she could muster, Dahlia picked up her carpetbag and walked out. On the porch, she sat heavily on a bench, fighting back tears. Emma began to cry in earnest, hungry and sensing her mother's distress. "It's all right, Emma," Dahlia murmured, even as her own voice broke. "We'll figure something out." She looked down the street, wondering if the church might offer sanctuary when a commotion caught her attention. A man on horseback was galloping into town, his hat pulled low over his face. He reined in his horse outside the general store and dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical clothes of a working cowboy: worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and scuffed boots. As he secured his horse to the hitching post, he glanced up, and for a moment his eyes met Dahlia's across the street. Something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or simple human kindness, made Dahlia look away quickly. She had learned the hard way that men's interest rarely came without a price. The man disappeared into the store, and Dahlia returned her attention to Emma, who was still fussing. From her bag, she pulled out a nearly empty bottle of milk, purchased at the last town they'd passed through. It wouldn't be enough, but it might soothe the baby temporarily. She was so focused on feeding Emma that she didn't notice the cowboy approaching until his shadow fell across them. "Madam, are you all right?" Dahlia looked up, startled. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was open and honest, with a strong jaw softened by concern. "Yes, thank you," she replied automatically, the polite response ingrained from years of proper upbringing. "We're just resting." The man looked from her to Emma and then to the carpetbag. You just arrive in town. Yes, Dahlia admitted, but we'll be moving on shortly, he frowned. On foot. With a little one. His gaze shifted to the hotel behind them and his expression hardened slightly. Let me guess, Mrs. Hargrove turned you away. Dahlia hesitated, then nodded. The man shook his head. That woman's got a heart made of boot leather. He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields. I'm Preston Taylor. I own a small ranch just outside town. Dahlia Fletcher, she responded hesitantly, and this is Emma. Preston smiled at the baby who had quieted with the milk. She's a beauty. He looked back at Dahlia, his expression turning serious. Mrs. Fletcher, I don't mean to pry, but it looks like you could use some help. Dahlia stiffened. I don't accept charity, Mr. Taylor. It's not charity to help a neighbor, he said. And anyone in Wildwood Creek is a neighbor, even if you just arrived. He hesitated, then continued, I've got a cabin on my property. It was built for the ranch foreman, but he moved on last month. It's just sitting empty now. Dahlia stared at him, uncertain. Why would you offer that to a complete stranger? Preston replaced his hat, adjusting it slightly. My mother and I came west when I was just a boy. Times were hard. If not for the kindness of strangers, we wouldn't have survived, he shrugged. Besides, I've got good instincts about people. Always have. Before Dahlia could respond, Emma began to cry again, the small amount of milk already consumed. She needs more milk, Dahlia said, embarrassment coloring her voice. And I need to find work. I can cook clean, so my ranch could use a good cook, Preston said thoughtfully. The men complain about my cooking something fierce, and that cabin's just gathering dust. He looked directly into her eyes. It would be a fair exchange. You cook for me and my hands, and you get the cabin and provisions for yourself and Emma. Dahlia hesitated. The offer seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, if something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But Emma was hungry and she was exhausted with no other prospects in sight. How do I know I can trust you? She asked bluntly. Preston didn't seem offended by the question. You don't. But you can ask around town about me. Most folks here have known me since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. He gestured to the general store, starting with Mr. Jenkins over there. As if on cue, an elderly man emerged from the store carrying a parcel. Preston Taylor got those nails you ordered. Preston waved in acknowledgement. Be right there, Mr. Jenkins. He turned back to Dahlia. What do you say, Mrs. Fletcher? At least come out to the ranch, get a hot meal, and rest. If you don't like what you see, I'll bring you back to town tomorrow. Dahlia looked down at Emma, who had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her little face pinched with hunger. What choice did she really have? All right, Mr. Taylor, we'll come to your ranch. For tonight. Preston smiled, the expression transforming his face. Excellent. Let me just pick up my supplies and we'll be on our way. He hesitated, then added, and Mrs. Fletcher, you can call me Preston. While Preston collected his purchases, Dahlia sat with Emma, wondering if she was making another terrible mistake. Her life had been a series of them lately trusting her late husband's promises, believing her father would forgive her for eloping, thinking Emma's birth would somehow mend the rift in her marriage. Each decision had led her further down a path of hardship. But Emma deserved better than to starve on the streets of a dusty Wyoming town. If this cowboy's offer was genuine, it could be the reprieve they desperately needed. Preston returned with his parcels and helped Dahlia onto his horse, handling her carpetbag with care. She sat sideways on the saddle, Emma secure in one arm while Preston led the horse on foot. It was a mile or so to his ranch, he explained, and the walk would do him good after a day in the saddle. As they left town, Dahlia could feel curious eyes watching them. The scandal of a young widow with a baby, leaving with the bachelor rancher, would certainly give the town gossips plenty to discuss. But she lifted her chin and focused on the road ahead. Let them talk. Emma's well-being was all that mattered now. The Taylor ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a main house, a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and several corrals for livestock. A creek ran along one side of the property, and beyond it, rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains. The cabin Preston had mentioned was set apart from the other buildings, closer to the creek. It was small but sturdy-looking, with a chimney and a small front porch. "It's not fancy," Preston said as he helped her down from the horse, "but it's clean and weathertight. I had one of the boys air it out last week, just in case we hired a new foreman soon." He led her to the cabin door, which opened to reveal a simple but comfortable space, a main room with a wood stove, a table and 2 chairs, a small bedroom visible through an open doorway, and a lean-to kitchen at the back. "There's a well right outside for water," Preston explained, setting her carpet bag down. "Outhouse is around back. I can have one of the boys bring some firewood over. Nights get cool even in summer." Dahlia stood in the center of the room, Emma still sleeping against her shoulder. The cabin was basic but clean, as promised. After weeks on the road, sleeping in stations and once even in a barn, it looked like paradise. "Thank you, Mr. Taylor Preston," she corrected herself. "This is more than I expected," Preston nodded, seeming pleased by her approval. "Good. Now, you and Emma get settled in. I'll send over some supplies from the main house: milk, bread, whatever we've got. Tomorrow, if you're still willing, you can start on the cooking." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Fletcher, Dahlia," she said softly, "if I'm to call you Preston." "Dahlia," he repeated, his voice warm. "I want you to know that you and Emma are safe here. Whatever brought you to Wildwood Creek, whatever you're running from, it can't follow you to this ranch." Dahlia's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Thank you." Preston nodded once more, then stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. Alone in the quiet cabin, Dahlia laid Emma carefully on the bed and sat beside her, finally allowing herself to exhale fully for the first time in months. She didn't know if she could trust Preston Taylor completely, but her instincts told her he was a man of his word. For tonight, at least, she and Emma were safe. Outside, the sun was setting over the Wyoming landscape, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Dahlia watched through the small window, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her heart. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. By the time darkness fell, Preston had sent over not only milk and bread as promised, but also a pot of hearty stew, fresh eggs for the morning, and a jar of honey. The ranch hand who delivered the items, a grizzled older man named Hank, also brought an armload of firewood and news that Preston had a crib that Emma could use if Dahlia wanted it. "Boss's sister left it behind when she moved to Denver," Hank explained. "Her young'uns are all grown now, but Preston never could bring himself to get rid of it." Dahlia accepted the offer gratefully. Emma had been sleeping in a makeshift bed fashioned from her shawl for too long. That night, with her daughter fed and sleeping peacefully, Dahlia allowed herself the luxury of a proper wash with hot water from the stove. She changed into her one clean nightgown and slipped between the sheets of her real bed for the first time in weeks. As she drifted towards sleep, she wondered about Preston Taylor. He seemed genuinely kind, but experience had taught her to be wary. Men, in her experience, always wanted something in return for their kindness. Her late husband, Charles, had seemed kind too, until she discovered the gambling debts and the other women. But those were worries for another day. Tonight she would rest. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the distant sounds of a working ranch coming to life. Dahlia rose early, eager to prove her worth. She dressed Emma and herself, then set about preparing breakfast using the supplies Preston had provided. By the time a knock came at the door, she had a pot of coffee brewing and was turning the last of the eggs in the pan. "Good morning," Preston said when she opened the door. He was already dressed for the day's work, his hat in his hands. "I hope you slept well, better than I have in months," Dahlia admitted. "Please come in. I've made breakfast if you'd like some." Preston entered, his gaze taking in the tidy cabin and Emma, who was awake and watching from a pile of blankets on the bed. "Something smells mighty fine." They ate at the small table, and Dahlia was pleased to see Preston's evident enjoyment of the simple meal. "If this is a sample of your cooking, the men are going to be mighty happy," he said, accepting a second cup of coffee. Speaking of which, I should explain how things work around here. The arrangement was straightforward. Dahlia would prepare 3 meals a day for Preston and his 5 ranch hands. She would cook in the main house, which had a larger kitchen, but otherwise, she and Emma would have complete privacy in their cabin. In exchange, they would receive room and board, plus a small wage that Dahlia insisted upon she needed to save for the future. That sounds fair, Dahlia agreed. Preston seemed relieved. Good. The men eat breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, and supper around sunset. In between, you're free to do as you please, he hesitated. There's something else. I've got a wagon heading into town today for supplies. If you give Hank a list, he can pick up anything you need. And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch which he placed on the table. An advance on your wages, for whatever you and Emma might need. Dahlia stared at the pouch, pride warring with practicality. Emma needed proper clothes and supplies. Thank you, she said finally, accepting the money. Preston stood, placing his hat back on his head. I'll have the boys bring over that crib today and anything else you might need for the cabin. Make a list. After he left, Dahlia sat for a long moment, thinking about how quickly her circumstances had changed. Yesterday, she'd been desperate with nowhere to go. Today, she had a roof over her head, work to do, and even a small advance to buy necessities. It seemed almost too good to be true. And in Dahlia's experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But for now, she had work to do. She gathered Emma, locked the cabin, and headed for the main house to begin preparing dinner for the hungry ranch hands. The main house was larger than the cabin but still modest, with a functional kitchen that showed signs of bachelor living mismatched dishes, basic utensils, and a pantry that was well stocked but disorganized. Dahlia set Emma on a blanket in the corner where she could keep an eye on her and set to work bringing order to the chaos. By noon, she had prepared a hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and apple cobbler for dessert. The ranch hands filed in, dusty and hungry, their initial awkwardness around her quickly forgotten as they dove into the food. Madam, this is the best meal I've had since I left my mama's table in Missouri, one young cowboy named Liam declared, helping himself to a second serving of everything. Don't go getting too fancy with the cooking, Hank warned her with a wink. These boys will never want to leave, and good hands are hard enough to find as it is. Preston ate quietly, watching the interaction with approval. When the meal was over, he stayed behind while the others returned to work. That was excellent, he said, helping her clear the dishes despite her protests. I haven't seen the men that happy about a meal in. Well, ever, Dahlia smiled, pleased by the praise. I enjoy cooking. It's satisfying to feed people who appreciate it. Preston leaned against the counter, studying her. Where did you learn to cook like that, if you don't mind my asking? Dahlia hesitated, unsure how much of her past she wanted to reveal. My mother taught me the basics. When she died, I took over the cooking for my father and me. Then later, when I was married, we couldn't afford servants, so I did it all myself. Your husband, Preston said carefully. He passed recently. Dahlia focused on washing a plate, not meeting his eyes. 6 months ago, pneumonia. It wasn't entirely a lie. Charles had indeed died of pneumonia contracted while fleeing creditors in a January rainstorm, but Preston didn't need to know that part. I'm sorry, Preston said simply. It must be difficult being alone with a child. Dahlia looked up then, surprised by the genuine compassion in his voice. It is, but we manage. Preston nodded, his expression thoughtful. Well, you're not alone now, not completely anyway. There was something in his voice that made Dahlia's heart beat a little faster. She turned away, suddenly flustered. I should start preparing for supper. I saw some salt pork in the pantry that would make a good stew. Preston took the hint and straightened up. I'll leave you to it then. Oh, and Hank's back from town. He left your supplies on the porch of the cabin. After Preston left, Dahlia leaned against the counter, trying to steady her breathing. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for Preston Taylor, no matter how kind he seemed. She had Emma to think about and a future to plan. Getting attached to this place or to Preston would only make things more difficult when it was time to move on, and they would need to move on eventually. Dahlia had no illusions about that. She had enemies from her past, people who might still be looking for her. The longer she stayed in one place, the greater the risk. But for now, she had work to do and a child to feed. The future would have to take care of itself. The days settled into a comfortable routine. Dahlia rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, returned to the cabin to tend to Emma during the midday hours, and then returned to the main house to prepare dinner and supper. The work was hard but satisfying, and the men treated her with respect, especially after Preston made it clear that she was under his protection. Emma thrived in the clean mountain air, growing plumper and more active by the day. The crib Preston provided, a beautiful hand-carved piece that had clearly been made with love, became her special place, decorated with a small quilt Dahlia had purchased with part of her wages. As for Preston, he remained courteous and kind, but Dahlia noticed that he never intruded on her privacy or made her feel uncomfortable. He seemed genuinely interested in her well-being and Emma's, without expecting anything in return beyond the meals she prepared. It was confusing. Men, in Dahlia's experience, always wanted something, but Preston seemed content with their arrangement as it was. One evening in late July, about 3 weeks after Dahlia's arrival at the ranch, Preston invited her to join him on the front porch of the main house after supper. The ranch hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and Emma was sleeping peacefully in her crib back at the cabin within easy hearing distance. "It's a beautiful night," Preston said as they sat in the rocking chairs, watching the stars come out. "Too nice to spend alone." Dahlia had to agree. The Wyoming night was magnificent, with a vast canopy of stars spread across the sky and the distant howl of coyotes adding a wild melody to the piece. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Preston said after they had sat in comfortable silence for a while. "I've been thinking about the approaching winter." Dahlia tensed slightly. Winter was months away, but she had been worrying about it too. The cabin, while snug enough in summer, would be cold when the snow came, and traveling with Emma would be impossible until spring. What about winter? She asked cautiously. Preston rocked slowly, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Winters are harsh here. That cabin, it's fine for now, but it wasn't built for the cold months. The stove isn't big enough, for one thing, and the walls need better insulation." Dahlia's heart sank. Was he about to tell her they would need to leave before the first snow? "I've been meaning to fix it up properly," Preston continued, "but I've been thinking. It might make more sense for you and Emma to move into the main house for the winter months. There's plenty of room, and it would be warmer and safer for the little one." Dahlia stared at him, startled. "Move into the main house with you?" Preston nodded. "I know it's unconventional, but this is the frontier. Conventional doesn't always work out here." He must have seen the hesitation in her face because he quickly added, "I'm not suggesting anything improper, Dahlia. You would have your own rooms, actually. The east wing of the house has a bedroom and a small sitting room that my sister used to use. It's private, with its own entrance if you want it." Dahlia considered his words. The offer was practical. The main house would certainly be warmer and more comfortable during the harsh winter months. But living under the same roof as Preston, even with separate quarters, would raise eyebrows in town. "What would people say?" she asked quietly. Preston shrugged. "People will talk no matter what we do. They're already talking about you living on my property. But I don't much care what people say as long as you and Emma are safe and warm." His straightforward answer surprised Dahlia. "Why do you care so much about our welfare, Preston? We're nothing to you." Preston was quiet for a long moment, the creak of his rocking chair the only sound. Finally, he spoke. "When I was 8 years old, my father died in a mining accident in California. My mother was left with nothing but me and the clothes on our backs. We traveled east, looking for her family in Missouri, but we ran out of money in Colorado. It was winter, much like the one coming, and we had nowhere to go." He paused, his voice growing softer. A rancher and his wife took us in. They didn't have to, they had their own hardships, but they made room for us, gave us shelter through that winter. In the spring, they helped my mother get work as a schoolteacher in town. He looked at Dahlia directly. That kindness saved our lives, I've never forgotten it. Dahlia felt a lump forming in her throat. And now you're passing that kindness on. Preston nodded. My mother always said that a kindness repaid is a kindness remembered. I'm just doing what was done for me. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of his words settling between them. I'll think about your offer, Dahlia said finally, for Emma's sake. Preston seemed satisfied with that. That's all I ask. There's no rush to decide, we've got months before the first snow. As they continued to rock in comfortable silence, Dahlia found herself studying Preston's profile in the dim light from the house windows. He was a handsome man, there was no denying that, but it was his character that was truly attractive, his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. She had not expected to find such a man in this remote corner of Wyoming. And she certainly had not expected to find herself drawn to anyone so soon after Charles's death. Not that it mattered. Preston had made it clear that his offer of help came with no strings attached, and Dahlia had no intention of complicating their arrangement with romantic feelings. Emma was her priority, and building a secure future for them both was all that mattered. Still, as the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Dahlia couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have someone like Preston Taylor as a permanent part of their lives. August passed in a haze of heat and hard work. The ranch's routine intensified as the men prepared for the fall roundup and the eventual drive of cattle to the railhead. Dahlia's days grew longer as she prepared extra food for the hands working longer hours. Despite the increased workload, she found herself enjoying the rhythm of ranch life. The men treated her with a respect she hadn't experienced in years, and Preston's quiet support never wavered. Emma, now nearly 6 months old, was thriving, growing plumper by the day and beginning to sit up on her own one particularly hot afternoon as Dahlia was hanging laundry behind the cabin. She noticed a cloud of dust on the road leading to the ranch. Shielding her eyes, she made out a single rider approaching at a steady pace. Visitors were rare at the Taylor Ranch, especially unannounced ones. Dahlia hurriedly gathered Emma from her blanket on the grass and retreated to the cabin, an instinctive caution making her heart beat faster. Through the window, she watched as the rider approached the main house. Preston emerged onto the porch, one hand casually resting near the holster at his hip, a precaution Dahlia had noticed he took with unexpected visitors. The man dismounted, and even from a distance, Dahlia could tell he wasn't a cowboy or a rancher. He was dressed in a city suit, dusty from the road but clearly expensive, and he carried himself with the arrogant assurance of a man used to getting his way. Preston and the stranger conversed for several minutes, their body language tense. At one point, the man gestured in the direction of Dahlia's cabin, and she instinctively stepped back from the window, though she was sure she couldn't be seen. Finally, the visitor remounted his horse and rode away, but not before looking long and hard in the direction of the cabin. Preston remained on the porch, watching until the man was out of sight, then turned and walked purposefully toward Dahlia's cabin. She met him at the door, Emma on her hip. "Who was that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Preston's expression was grim. "A private detective from Denver, name of Griggs. He's looking for a young widow and her baby." His blue eyes studied her face carefully. "He's looking for you, isn't he, Dahlia?" Dahlia felt the blood drain from her face. She clutched Emma tighter, her mind racing. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I hadn't seen anyone matching his description," Preston said, "but he didn't believe me. Said he'd been tracking you since Denver and had reliable information you'd come this way." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Dahlia, who is looking for you? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Dahlia hesitated, fear and uncertainty warring within her. Could she trust Preston with the truth? If she didn't, and the detective returned with a sheriff, what then? "May I come in?" Preston asked quietly. "I think it's time we talked." Dahlia nodded, stepping back to allow him inside. She placed Emma in her crib with a toy to occupy her, then sat at the table, hands folded tightly in her lap. Preston took the seat across from her, his expression serious but not unkind. "Start at the beginning," he said, and so she did. Dahlia told him about her childhood in St. Louis, her strict father who was a prominent banker, and her impulsive elopement at 19 with Charles Fletcher, a charming businessman who'd swept into town and swept her off her feet. "My father disowned me when I eloped," she explained, her voice low so as not to disturb Emma. "Said I was dead to him. Charles promised me a wonderful life in Denver, but—" She paused, the painful memories still fresh. "It wasn't what he promised. He had gambling debts, other women. When I became pregnant, he was furious. Said he never wanted children." Preston's face darkened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "After Emma was born, things got worse. The creditors were always at our door. Charles would disappear for days, then return with just enough money to hold them off temporarily. I later learned he was borrowing from a man named Victor Blackwell, a very dangerous man in Denver." Preston's eyebrows rose. "Blackwell has a reputation that's reached even out here." Dahlia nodded grimly. "Charles kept promising he had a big business deal coming that would solve everything. Then in January he came home in a panic, soaking wet from a rainstorm. He said we had to leave Denver immediately, that Blackwell's men were after him. He fell ill that night, pneumonia. He was dead within a week." She took a shuddering breath. "After the funeral, Blackwell came to me personally. Said Charles had used our house as collateral without my knowledge, and that I now owed his debt. When I said I had nothing to give him, he suggested I could work for him instead in one of his establishments." Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. "His brothels." Dahlia nodded, shame heating her cheeks even though none of it had been her fault. "I refused. That night I packed what I could carry, took Emma, and fled. I've been traveling ever since, taking work where I could find it, staying ahead of his men. I thought I'd gone far enough." Her voice trailed off. Preston was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "And your father, could you not seek help from him?" Dahlia shook her head. "I wrote to him when Charles died, begging for help. The letter came back unopened, marked return to sender. He meant what he said. I'm dead to him." Preston stood suddenly, pacing the small cabin. "This detective, did he say he was working for Blackwell?" "No, but who else would it be?" Dahlia watched him anxiously. "Preston, I should leave. I've brought danger to your door, no." The word was firm, brooking no argument. Preston turned to face her, his jaw set in a determined line. "You're not going anywhere, Dahlia, not unless you want to." "But Blackwell has no authority here," Preston interrupted. "This is Wyoming territory, not Colorado. And Blackwell, for all his power in Denver, is just a man who has no claim on you or Emma." Dahlia stared at him, hope and disbelief warring within her. "You believe me?" Just like that, Preston's expression softened. "I've watched you every day for over a month, Dahlia. You're honest, hardworking, devoted to your child. Whatever your past, I know your character." He sat down again, leaning forward earnestly. "You and Emma are safe here. I won't let anyone take you away against your will." Tears welled in Dahlia's eyes. "Why would you do this for us? Take such a risk?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because in the short time you've been here, this ranch has become more of a home than it's been in years. Because Emma's laughter is the sweetest sound I've heard in a long time." He hesitated, then added softly, "Because you matter to me, Dahlia. You and Emma both." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, more powerful than any flowery profession of love could have been. "The detective will be back," Dahlia said, her practical side asserting itself even as her heart raced at his words. "Probably with the sheriff next time," Preston nodded. "Most likely, but Sheriff Wilson is a fair man and a friend. He won't take anyone's word over mine without proof." "And what proof does Blackwell have? A debt owed by your late husband, that died with Charles. He's a powerful man, used to getting what he wants." So am I, Preston said with a slight smile, in my own way. Dahlia couldn't help but smile back, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since Charles's death, she wasn't alone in her struggle. Thank you, she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate. Preston reached across the table and took her hand in his, a gesture of solidarity and perhaps something more. You and Emma belong here now, Dahlia. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. In that moment, with his hand warm around hers and Emma's soft breathing the only sound in the cabin, Dahlia allowed herself to believe it might be true. The detective returned 3 days later, as Preston had predicted, this time accompanied by Sheriff Wilson. Dahlia watched from the window of the main house, where Preston had insisted she stay while he dealt with the visitors. The conversation on the porch was lengthy and appeared heated at times. At one point, the detective produced some papers which Preston examined carefully before handing back. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the two men remounted their horses and rode away. Preston entered the house, his expression grim but determined. The detective had a document he claims is a lien against your property in Denver, signed by both Charles and you. Dahlia gasped. That's impossible. I never signed anything like that. Preston nodded. I thought as much. The signature didn't look right, too neat for someone signing a legal document. He sat beside her at the kitchen table. Sheriff Wilson isn't convinced either. He's giving us time to consult with the territorial judge, who will be in Wildwood Creek next month for circuit court. Dahlia felt sick with worry. And if the judge sides with Blackwell, he won't, Preston assured her. We have truth on our side, Dahlia, and I've sent a telegram to a lawyer friend in Denver who can investigate Blackwell's claim properly. The confidence in his voice calmed her somewhat, but a shadow of fear remained. What if they try to take Emma and me by force? Preston's expression hardened. That won't happen. I've spoken with the ranch hands. They'll be keeping a closer watch on the property, and one of them will always be nearby when I'm not around. I've put you all in danger, Dahlia said, guilt weighing heavily on her. No, Preston said firmly. Blackwell and men like him are the danger. All you did was refuse to be a victim. His words struck a chord in Dahlia's heart. She had been running for so long, viewing herself as a victim of circumstances, but Preston saw her differently, as someone strong enough to stand against injustice, to protect her child at all costs. What happens now? She asked. Now, Preston said, we carry on as normal. You cook, I ranch, and we wait for the judge. Blackwell's detective will be watching, but he won't make a move with the sheriff aware of the situation. Dahlia nodded, grateful for Preston's steady presence. And if the judge rules in our favor? Then Blackwell will have to give up or try another approach. Either way, we'll face it together. The word warmed Dahlia from within, dispelling some of her fear. For the first time since Charles's betrayal, she wasn't facing her troubles alone. The following weeks were tense but uneventful. The detective remained in town, watching the ranch from a distance but making no move to approach. Dahlia went about her duties, cooking for the ranch hands and caring for Emma, always aware of the lurking threat but determined not to let it rule her life. Preston was a constant presence, protective without being overbearing. In the evenings, after Emma was asleep and the day's work done, they often sat together on the porch of the main house, talking until the stars came out. Dahlia learned about Preston's childhood in California, his mother's determination to provide him with an education despite their poverty, and how he'd worked in mines and on ranches across the West, before finally saving enough to buy his own land 5 years ago. In turn, she told him about her sheltered upbringing in St. Louis, her love of books, and her dreams of seeing the world, dreams that had led her to accept Charles's proposal so readily. I was naive, she admitted one evening as they watched a spectacular sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought love was enough, that everything else would somehow work out. Preston considered her words. Maybe you were naive, but there's no shame in believing in love, Dahlia. The shame belongs to the man who took advantage of that belief. His insight touched her deeply. No one had ever absolved her of blame for her failed marriage before, not even herself. As September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and hints of the autumn to come, Dahlia found herself growing increasingly comfortable in Preston's company. There was an ease between them now, a natural rhythm to their conversations and silences alike. Sometimes, when their hands accidentally touched or their eyes met for a moment too long, she felt a spark of something that both thrilled and frightened her. But she kept these feelings carefully contained, uncertain if Preston felt the same and unwilling to risk the sanctuary they had built together over something as unpredictable as her heart. The territorial judge, a stern-faced man named Judge Hammond, arrived in Wildwood Creek on the third Monday in September. Preston received word that their case would be heard the following day and spent the evening reviewing documents with Dahlia, including letters from his lawyer friend in Denver that cast serious doubt on the legitimacy of Blackwell's claim. The lawyer found 3 other cases where Blackwell used forged documents to claim property, Preston explained. None of the victims pursued it, they were too afraid of him, but with these precedents, the judge will have to take our claim seriously. Dahlia wanted to share his confidence, but years of disappointment had taught her caution. And if we lose, Preston took her hand, his touch reassuring, then we appeal, and if that fails, we find another way. But I promise you this, Dahlia, as long as I have breath in my body, you and Emma will not be forced to go anywhere against your will. The fierceness of his promise brought tears to her eyes. Why are you doing all this for us? Preston looked away for a moment, his expression conflicted before meeting her gaze again. I think you know why, Dahlia, and she did. The realization had been growing in her heart for weeks, despite her efforts to deny it. Preston Taylor, this quiet, honorable cowboy, had fallen in love with her, and against all odds and expectations, she had fallen in love with him. Preston, she began, unsure what to say but knowing something needed to be said. You don't need to say anything, he interrupted gently. Not now, with everything else happening. Let's get through tomorrow first. Dahlia nodded, grateful for his understanding. Tomorrow would determine their future, or if they even had one to consider. The territorial court convened in Wildwood Creek's small town hall, a plain building that served as church, meeting place, and courthouse as needed. Dahlia wore her best dress, a navy blue cotton that Preston had purchased for her in town, with Emma in a new white frock. The detective from Denver was there, accompanied by a slick-looking lawyer who had arrived on the morning stage. Sheriff Wilson sat near the front, his expression neutral but his eyes watchful. Judge Hammond called the case with little preamble. Blackwell versus Fletcher, regarding a debt claim and property lien. The proceedings were formal but straightforward. Blackwell's lawyer presented the document allegedly signed by both Charles and Dahlia, pledging their Denver property and any future assets as collateral for Charles's gambling debts. When it was their turn, Preston's lawyer friend from Denver, who had arrived the previous evening, methodically dismantled the claim. He presented evidence of Blackwell's previous fraudulent documents, had Dahlia testify that she had never signed such a paper, and produced a handwriting expert who testified that the signature was likely forged. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Sheriff Wilson himself, who produced a wanted poster from Missouri showing that Blackwell was sought for fraud and extortion in that state under a different name. The judge listened to all testimony without expression, occasionally asking pointed questions. When both sides had presented their cases, he called a recess to consider his ruling. You did wonderfully, Preston told Dahlia as they waited in the anteroom, clear and composed. I was terrified, she admitted, but knowing you were there helped. Preston smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I'll always be there, Dahlia, no matter what happens today. Before she could respond, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Hammond had reached his decision. Having reviewed the evidence presented, the judge began, his voice stern. "I find that the document presented by Mr. Blackwell's representative is of questionable authenticity at best and fraudulent at worst. The signature purporting to be Mrs. Fletcher's does not match her known handwriting, and the pattern of similar claims made by Mr. Blackwell suggests a troubling pattern of behavior." Dahlia felt Preston's hand close around hers as the judge continued. "Furthermore, even if the document were legitimate, which I do not believe it is, the claim would be against the estate of the late Charles Fletcher, not against his widow personally, especially regarding assets acquired after his death. As such, I rule that Mr. Blackwell has no legal claim against Mrs. Dahlia Fletcher or any property currently in her possession." The judge banged his gavel. Case dismissed. "And Mr. Griggs," he added, addressing the detective, "I suggest you inform your employer that any further harassment of Mrs. Fletcher will be met with the full force of territorial law." It was over. Dahlia sat in stunned disbelief as Preston's lawyer shook their hands, congratulating them on the victory. The detective and Blackwell's lawyer departed quickly, their expressions thunderous. "It's really over?" Dahlia asked Preston as they left the town hall, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. "It's over," Preston confirmed, his smile brighter than she had ever seen it. "Blackwell won't risk crossing a territorial judge, not with his own legal troubles in Missouri now exposed." Relief washed over Dahlia in a wave so powerful she felt her knees weaken. Preston must have noticed because his arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "Let's go home," he said softly, and Dahlia nodded, too overwhelmed for words. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. As they approached, Dahlia saw the ranch hands gathered near the main house, waiting anxiously for news. When Preston raised his hand in a gesture of victory, they erupted into cheers. "They were all rooting for you," Preston explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "You've become part of this ranch, Dahlia, part of our family." Family. The word resonated in Dahlia's heart. She had been alone for so long, cut off from her father, betrayed by her husband. The idea of belonging somewhere to someone was almost too much to comprehend. After a celebratory dinner with the ranch hands, during which Hank proposed so many toasts that he had to be helped back to the bunkhouse, Dahlia and Preston found themselves alone on the porch of the main house once more. Emma was asleep in the cabin, with the window open so Dahlia could hear if she woke. "I've been thinking," Preston said after they had sat in comfortable silence for a while. "Now that the threat from Blackwell is gone, you're free to go anywhere, do anything you want." Dahlia turned to look at him, surprised. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No," Preston said quickly. "Quite the opposite, I'm asking you to stay, permanently." Dahlia's heart began to race. "As your cook?" she asked, needing to be certain of his meaning. Preston took her hand, his eyes serious in the lamplight spilling from the window. "As my wife, Dahlia, if you'll have me." Though she had begun to suspect his feelings, the proposal still took her breath away. "Preston, I know it seems sudden," he interrupted, "and maybe it is. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Dahlia Fletcher. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you sing to Emma when you think no one can hear, and the way you stand up straight even when you're afraid." He squeezed her hand gently. "And I love Emma too. I want to be a father to her, to watch her grow up strong and free on this ranch." Tears filled Dahlia's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Preston, I came here with nothing but my daughter and a carpet bag. I had no hope, no future. You gave us shelter, protection, a place to belong. How could I not love you for that?" "Is that a yes?" Preston asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice that touched Dahlia deeply. "It's a yes," she confirmed, smiling through her tears. "I love you, Preston Taylor. And I would be honored to be your wife." His answering smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Preston leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and tenderness, so different from the demanding kisses Charles had given her. When they parted, Preston kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I promise to be a good husband to you, Dahlia, and a good father to Emma. You both belong here with me. You both belong." The words echoed in Dahlia's heart, filling a void she hadn't realized was there. For the first time in her life, she truly did belong, not as a banker's obedient daughter or a gambler's neglected wife, but as her own person, chosen and cherished for exactly who she was. The wedding took place on a crisp October day, with the aspen trees gleaming gold against the blue Wyoming sky. It was a small ceremony, held in the town church with only the ranch hands, Sheriff Wilson, and a few townspeople who had come to accept Dahlia as one of their own in attendance. Emma, dressed in a white dress Dahlia had sewn herself, sat contentedly on Hank's lap during the ceremony, occasionally babbling happily as if adding her own approval to the proceedings. Dahlia wore a simple but elegant dress of ivory silk that Preston had ordered from Denver, arriving just in time for the wedding. As she walked down the short aisle toward him, she marveled at how fate had led her to this moment, to this man who waited for her with love shining in his eyes. "You look beautiful," Preston whispered as she reached him. "So do you," she replied with a smile, taking in his neat black suit and freshly trimmed hair. The minister's words were traditional but heartfelt, and when it came time for the vows, both Dahlia and Preston spoke with clear, unwavering voices, their promises to each other ringing true in the small church. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister concluded. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Taylor." Preston's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a seal on the vows they had just exchanged and a pledge for the future they would build together. The celebration afterwards was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the trees. There was plenty of food, music from a fiddle player in town, and dancing that continued well into the night. As the evening wore on, Dahlia found herself standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching as Preston swung Emma around in a gentle dance, the baby's delighted laughter rising above the music. Sheriff Wilson appeared beside her, a cup of punch in his hand. "You've got yourself a good man there, Mrs. Taylor." "I know," Dahlia said, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "I'm very fortunate." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Luck may have brought you to Wildwood Creek, madam, but what happened after wasn't luck. You earned this happiness." He tipped his hat to her and moved away, leaving Dahlia to consider his words. Perhaps he was right. She had survived Charles's betrayal, Blackwell's threats, and months on the run with an infant. She had found the courage to trust again, to love again, despite everything. Preston approached, Emma still in his arms. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Taylor? You look very serious for a bride on her wedding day." Dahlia smiled up at him, reaching to smooth a wisp of Emma's hair. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. How different things might have been if you hadn't been in town that day, if you hadn't offered us shelter." Preston shifted Emma to one arm so he could wrap the other around Dahlia's waist. "I believe some things are meant to be, Dahlia. You and Emma were meant to come to Wildwood Creek, and I was meant to be there when you did. You both belong," he had said that first day. And now, surrounded by friends and with her new family beside her, Dahlia finally believed it was true. As the seasons changed and winter settled over the Wyoming landscape, Dahlia found herself more content than she had ever been. The ranch house was warm and snug against the cold, and the sight of Preston reading to Emma by the fire in the evenings never failed to fill her heart with joy. They had moved her things from the cabin as Preston had suggested, though they kept it ready for guests or for use in the summer months. Their life together fell into a comfortable routine, Preston managing the ranch, Dahlia overseeing the household and caring for Emma, both of them working side by side to build a future. News came from Denver in late January that Victor Blackwell had been arrested and extradited to Missouri to face charges there. Dahlia felt the last weight of fear lift from her shoulders with this knowledge, though she had already begun to feel safe under Preston's protection. Emma's first birthday in February was celebrated with a small party, the ranch hands presenting her with handmade gifts: a wooden horse from Hank, a tiny quilt from the cook's wife in town, a rag doll from Liam. Preston's gift was the most special. A small silver locket containing a lock of Dahlia's hair and one of his own. "So she'll always have us with her," he explained. As spring arrived, bringing new calves to the ranch and wildflowers to the meadows, Dahlia discovered she was expecting a child. Preston's joy at the news was boundless. "A brother or sister for Emma," he said, placing a gentle hand on Dahlia's still flat stomach. "Our family is growing, our family." The words never ceased to warm Dahlia's heart. From the moment she had arrived at Preston's ranch with nothing but her infant daughter and a carpetbag, he had made room for them in his home and in his heart. "You both belong," he had said, and with each passing day, Dahlia believed it more deeply. Their son, William Preston Taylor, was born on a clear November morning in 1879. With Preston pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door until the doctor finally allowed him in to see his wife and newborn son. "He's perfect," Preston whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with a tenderness that brought tears to Dahlia's eyes. "Just like his mother." Emma, now nearly 2 and speaking in complete sentences, peered curiously at her baby brother. "My baby," she declared, touching his tiny hand with gentle wonder. "That's right, sweetheart," Dahlia agreed, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. "He's your baby brother, and we're going to take very good care of him, just like Preston takes care of us." As the years passed, the Taylor Ranch prospered, expanding as Preston purchased neighboring land when it became available. Emma grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her mother's dark hair and Preston's blue eyes, while William, called Will by everyone, became a sturdy, thoughtful boy who shadowed his father around the ranch from the moment he could walk. 2 more children joined the family: Catherine, born in 1882, and James, in 1885. The large family filled the ranch house with laughter, music, and occasional chaos that Dahlia wouldn't have traded for all the peace and quiet in the world. Through it all, Preston remained the steady center of their lives, his love for Dahlia deepening with each passing year. They had their disagreements. Of course, Preston's tendency to take on too much work without asking for help, Dahlia's occasional bouts of independence that led her to make decisions without consulting him, but they always found their way back to each other, their bond strengthened by each challenge they overcame together. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Preston surprised Dahlia with a small gold pendant inscribed with the words, "You belong." It was a simple gift, but one that moved her deeply, a reminder of the words that had changed her life a decade earlier. "I never imagined when I rode into Wildwood Creek that day that my life would change so completely," Dahlia told him as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, watching the stars come out over the land they both loved. "I was so afraid, so alone." Preston took her hand, his touch as reassuring as it had been on that first day. "And I never imagined, when I saw a tired young woman with a baby on the hotel porch, that I was looking at my future." He smiled, lines crinkling around his eyes, lines that Dahlia loved because they spoke of a decade of smiles shared together. "But something in me knew even then that you both belonged here, with me." "We did," Dahlia agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We do." And as the night deepened around them, and the familiar sounds of their ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the gentle creaking of the house where their children slept safely enveloped them like a beloved blanket, Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last. Not in a place, but in the heart of the man beside her, the man who had made room in his home and said so simply, so powerfully, "You both belong."